Fun fact, a deep sea octopus set the record for the longest brooding period at 53 months, or about 4.5 years, or about 2 trips to the DMV. All right, our first question.
Hold on. Why are there 2 Christmas trees in the house right now?
Bro, are you even festive? Like, do you even Christmas or?
It's like November 5th. It's like so early.
Yeah, but how is Santa gonna know what houses to hit first if you're not like way ahead of the game?
You know Santa Claus isn't real, right?
Yeah, no, that's not true. What's really going on when I wake up a day after an intense finger session and I feel my fingers stiff but not painful? Is it better to take a rest on such days? Today I woke up with that feeling, but one finger was feeling particularly stiff. Although 5 minutes after waking up, all my fingers felt normal again. So this is a really cool question actually. So the stiffness that you get early in the morning after a hard day of climbing is more generally just because of increased interstitial fluid or swelling. That's not necessarily a bad sign though. That can be a sign of healing. When we work hard, we cause micro trauma to our tissue, and that's totally normal and part of the training process. Remember, the strength training is part of a progressively overloading the tissue, which causes a breakdown, and then we rest and rebuild the tissue even stronger. The process of breaking down the tissue causes some mild inflammation, again that's normal, and accumulation of fluid in the area. When we're moving throughout the day, it doesn't feel as bad though because our bodies are like sponges. Movement contracts and compresses tissue and even joints, and then decompresses it as well. So it's like a sponge, compression and that decompression is going to help move that fluid around. When we sleep, we don't have that movement, so the fluid can accumulate in those areas a little bit more and can cause that stiffness when you wake up. Now the sign that you mentioned, 5 minutes after moving and you feel kind of back to normal, is a good sign. That basically is just saying, yeah, it was a little stiff, that healing is going on, but you moved the tissue, the swelling or the interstitial fluid accumulation went back down and you're doing fine. Now, to kind of address your question of should I be resting then on those days, I would say use this as a gauge because it's not the only thing to consider. Yeah, it's a sign that you worked your fingers really hard, and if you're feeling that, you should probably consider taking a rest day. But if it's not bad and you're feeling really good and you want to do a technique day or work on your movement, that's okay. But again, remember that rest is a really important part of your recovery and getting stronger. So it's not a bad thing to take a rest day if you are feeling that. Okay, so follow up on the deep sea octopus thing, otherwise known as Octomom, because it's kind of super cool. So these super moms will basically shut off every part of their brain except one area that focuses on just protecting her eggs while they brood or develop. Think of an entire musical orchestra just stopping except for the cowbell section. This small portion of her brain will remain active with the sole purpose of protecting the eggs. She'll fight off crabs and other predators, but won't eat anything herself, even if dinner's right in front of their face. This focus will persist until the babies are born, at which time the mom will sadly die. But what dedication. Go Octomom. So I personally do quite well with 60-second rests so far for my hangboarding, but my hangboard experience is admittedly limited. Is there some research that tells us that the standard 3 to 5 minute breaks of max strength workouts should also be applied when hangboarding? Yeah, so there has been research related both to general physiology of max efforts and with hangboard protocols, such as with Dr. Eva Lopez. Our physiology tells us that if we are producing enough effort that will cause failure around 10 seconds, we're using an energy system like the phosphocreatine system, otherwise known as our alactic anaerobic system, that will take longer to recover. We also know that to promote the best adaptations, we want to load as much healthy force as possible. So loading the tissue when it's not at its optimum may not produce optimal results. So if you're not resting long enough, you may not be producing optimal force, which may mean less than optimal results. Now, there is research out there that is good and well known and is not disputed, but everyone is slightly different. I still strongly support that, the 3 to 5 minutes of rest time for your max effort training, but the only way to truly know for you, because I know you say it feels good, is to use like a crane scale. You need to be objective, not subjective, because you may feel good with that 60-second rest period, but you may not actually be pulling as hard. So it's important to differentiate a subjective measurement, which is just, I feel good, versus an objective one, which is using an actual instrument to tell you whether you are pulling as hard or if that rest time of only 60 seconds is not enough for you. Hey, great video. Can I ask about your titles laid out in the beginning? What do the abbreviations stand for? I'm having trouble trying to transfer/translate them to equivalent ones in my native language. So I believe you're talking about the titles in my name.
Yeah, here we go.
So just let me go ahead and talk about myself for a second here. So PT means physical therapist, DPT means doctor of physical therapy, OCS is orthopedic clinical specialist, and SES is sports clinical specialist. Now I don't want to talk about myself too much, but
Yes,
I do. But the PT, DPT thing I think is a bit strange. The PT part just means that I've basically passed my national exam and I'm a licensed PT. The DPT part means I've graduated from an accredited school with my clinical doctorate. The OCS and the SCS are both board certifications that are attained later after gaining work and experience in a sports and orthopedic setting. About the cracking, usually I get slight discomfort, I can't really call it pain, in my ring finger of the right hand and the ring middle of the left. Then I have to crack them to release the pain. This helps for a while until I have to crack them again. I can't really crimp with them when they're not cracked because it actually hurts. Is that weird? Okay, so the biggest hint for this is what you mentioned last in your question. You can't really crimp with them when they are not yet cracked. What may be happening is that your joint mobility may be limited, and as such, when you go to crimp, you're increasing the compressive force on the joint, or the joint is just not simply moving perfectly in a biomechanical sense, and that can cause the pain. But after cracking it, you're literally improving the mobility of the joint and possibly even the biomechanics of the joint, which would mean less pain. The other possibilities include the placebo effect, and that it simply feels good when you crack your joints, and or there is the inhibition effect related to cracking that says that after you crack a joint, the surrounding muscles will reduce their rigidity, which can reduce the discomfort. That applies sometimes more towards your mid-back or your neck, but can also sometimes just apply in the fingers as well. So likely you might want to look into the overall mobility of your joint and see if it feels limited compared to the others, and then you'll want to work on improving that mobility. Is it best to put prehabilitation exercises for elbows on climbing days or non-climbing days? Currently I do them on climbing days based on the assumption that those tendons are being used anyways. Then I do complete rest days of those tendons on non-climbing days, allowing for real recovery. I've also heard of training plans that put rehab work on non-climbing days. Any thoughts on this? To answer this question, honestly, a lot of it's going to depend on what's going to work best for you and what your schedule or your timing allotment is going to allow you to do. But here are some thoughts and general ideas to help guide your training. So if you're doing your prehab exercises on climbing days, there are two factors to consider. If you do them before climbing, then you need to look at that day as a training day for climbing, like technique, movement, etc., and not limit bouldering, as you won't be able to climb as strong since you have already allocated some of your energy to your prehab. On the other hand, if you do your prehab exercises after climbing, then there are some other factors to consider. You'll likely be fatigued to the point where you may not be generating enough force to actually cause strength changes with your training, but rather just targeting more specific muscles or tendons to help increase blood flow. So if your goal is to work on strength, you may not be as effective doing it after climbing, as I said, because you may not be able to load that tissue up to the point where it needs for that adaptation because it's already fatigued. If the goal is to work on endurance of those muscle groups, on the other hand, then it's okay to follow up with your prehab training after climbing because you're just continuing to work on the endurance of those muscles. It's important to then incorporate a rest day after that, like you mentioned, because then you've really worked through that tissue. You're going to want to have time to allow that tissue to recover. Another factor to consider when we're talking about doing the prehab exercises after climbing is if they're like secondary or primary muscle groups. So like with climbing, obviously your primary muscle groups are going to be your like wrist and finger flexors, whereas secondary ones may be those pronators and supinators. Those may not be as fatigued from climbing, so they may be able to produce that force needed to produce strength changes for like the pronators and supinators, whereas your wrist flexors are probably going to fit under that category of being fatigued because they are a primary muscle group with climbing. On the flip side, there is a benefit of doing your kind of like prehab exercises on an off day if you're trying to improve strength. Like say you feel like you need more strength to your extensors. Doing it on an off day means those muscles may be more well recovered, and so you can work more on strength because you're producing more force at that tissue. Now again, you have to think about what works for you because then you're going to need a rest day before you try and go hard with climbing again. I recently discovered your channel after Emil name dropped you. What? Thanks, Emil. I noted in Stretching 101 you said around 7.5 minutes per week per muscle group is enough to see improvements, but then in a Q&A you also said that you should be stretching 2 or maybe even 3 times a day. Seeing as we're immobile for large parts of the day, should we consider doing this routine twice a day? Also, would you consider our bodies ready for PNF style stretching post this routine? Yeah, I know, that 7.5 minute thing is such good news, right? Like it really doesn't take much time to see improvements. It just takes consistency. And yeah, I also have recommended stretching multiple times a day. The reason for that, as you said in your actual question, is that we are often immobile for large parts of the day. That immobility can make you feel stiff and uncomfortable. It can cause pain and make you feel discouraged about your mobility and your body in general. Breaking up these hours of sitting with some mobility and stretches can really help to make you feel healthier throughout the day, and obviously just break up those long hours of sitting to prevent more chronic issues such as like lower back and neck pain. So if you are going to do that a couple of times a day, you can do the full routine twice. You don't have to, you can do parts of it. It's just about breaking up those long hours of sitting so your body feels like happier and healthier in general, and you don't develop those like chronic issues. Now, another part when you answered about the PNF stretching, yeah, of course you can do that after you've gone through this routine, just as long as you know what you should be doing with PNF style stretching. How fast is it safe to progress? If you're climbing V5s with thin holds and finger pockets after your first month climbing, is it okay on your tendons or are you asking for injury? Okay. So this one was harder for me to answer because honestly, initially it made me cringe a bit. Let's be real. Every situation is unique and every individual is different. So it's hard for me to just shut this down. But in general, that feels like an unsafe progression, and I don't believe any of my other professional colleagues would disagree. Where are my professional colleagues? They're around here somewhere.
Right here, dude, right behind the camera.
You believe it, right? You support it?
Yeah, for sure, dude.
Yeah,
it's cool.
Yeah, perfect. But really, like pockets and small crimps apply a lot of force to the tissue in new ways and can definitely lead to injury even with like an experienced climber. And if I'm being honest, like I do hate being the one sitting here like waving a theoretical cane in the air and yelling at people to slow down and get off my lawn. Because there are those few people out there that just have great genetics, great technique, or just unnaturally strong tendons. But I can't say that's normal. In fact, ultimately I see the opposite. I've seen too many people like progress really quickly and end up getting injured way far more often than not. So my recommendation, if you are progressing this quickly, is to really make sure you're getting plenty of rest. Don't let the stoke of progressing that quickly cause you to create an overuse injury because you climb, 4 or 5 times a week. Give your body a greater chance to heal and adapt to these forces, and it'll also allow you to listen to your body and see, like, is there pain developing in your fingers? Do you feel as strong as ever? Or is it starting to wear down on you a bit? Tissue adapts at different rates. So a lot of these initial gains that we make with whether it's climbing or weight training is neuromuscular. It's your body learning the right amount of motor units to recruit, what percentages of them, how to build tension properly, etc. That can happen in like 1, 2, maybe even 3 weeks, and we get those big neuromuscular gains. Our muscle, that's going to take more like 4 to 8 weeks to kind of adapt to those changes. So like 4 weeks would be obviously if you're a lot younger, 8 weeks if you're a bit older. And then finally, even slower than that is going to be the connective tissue. So those changes to our connective tissue, like our tendons, pulleys, etc., is going to take even longer than that. It can take months for that strength to build up. So you may be getting like that neuromuscular and maybe some of that muscle strength to be able to pull on these things, but your pulleys and those other parts of your connective tissue probably aren't keeping up, and that's what's going to end up leading to that injury because you have two systems way out competing the third. So take your time, don't rush through this. If you love the sport, that's great, but if you be patient with it, it'll pay off in the end. All right, well, thanks again for all of the questions. We've been getting a lot of great questions and honestly a lot of really good feedback recently, so we appreciate all the nice comments you guys have been leaving. But really, we've got a lot of great content coming out that you're not gonna wanna miss. We've got some OG, actual rehab videos coming out. We have some great videos coming out related to questions from you guys. We've got a new series we're gonna be coming out with next, The Anatomy of the Climb, where we kind of dissect climbs and how we look at it, or I look at it from a PT point of view. And we'll be reviewing it with Emil as well. So sorry about that part. I'll still be there, fortunately. I know Emil will bring us down a little bit, but you'll survive, don't worry.
Rude, everyone hates you. They just want to see me.
I know, we do like to switch it up with Emil coming in, give you guys a little break. And we even have some really cool collabs that we're gonna be working on. So stay tuned, everyone. Until next time, train, climb, stand, repeat. Okay, so kind of got to follow up on that octopus. I was gonna say Octomom, but I realized I didn't say that earlier. So another factor to consider is Hubas Beta supports all holidays and all festive activities. We do not discriminate. Sweet nutrition series where we're going to be working on with a registered dietitian. So we've been looking like a Wookiee. Content coming out soon, so be sure to pay attention and like and okay.